They cut their way out of safety, fled barefoot into lethal conditions, and never returned. Yet the injuries found on their bodies did not match the danger they were supposedly escaping. The official conclusion claimed the deaths were caused by an unknown compelling force. That phrase closed the case. It did not explain it. 9 experienced hikers vanished during a planned expedition. What searches eventually found raised more questions than answers. A tent abandoned from the inside, orderly equipment left behind, bodies scattered in patterns that contradicted panic, and injuries so severe that some investigators quietly admitted they had never seen anything like them. Decades later, the evidence remains documented, preserved, and deeply unresolved. The victims were not reckless amateurs. They were trained hikers, engineers, and students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, selected for a high-difficulty ski expedition that would qualify several of them for advanced certification. Most had completed similar trips before. Their leader was methodical, respected, and known for caution. Their written plans were formal, approved, and tracked by authorities. They carried cameras, diaries, spare clothing, food supplies, and emergency equipment consistent with long-distance winter travel. Their group dynamic is well documented through journals and photographs recovered later. There were no recorded conflicts, no signs of breakdown, no evidence of alcohol abuse or reckless decision-making. Several members had served in the military or worked in technical fields that demanded discipline. One was a radio engineering student, another studied nuclear physics. Their backgrounds do not suggest impulsive flight or irrational mass panic. One member turned back early due to illness. His survival was accidental and unrelated to the later deaths, but it provides an important control variable. The expedition was functioning normally before the final ascent. He later testified that nothing seemed wrong when he left. The remaining 9 continued toward their planned route. Their last confirmed campsite was established on an exposed slope rather than in the tree line below. This decision has been debated extensively. Some argue it was made to avoid losing elevation. Others believe it was a navigational error in poor visibility. What matters is not the choice itself, but what happened after. Something forced all 9 individuals to abandon that tent abruptly without boots, without coats, without retrieving essential gear, and to do so by cutting through the tent fabric instead of using the entrance. The first bodies were found near a large cedar tree at the forest edge. Two were barefoot, wearing only underwear. Their hands showed signs of extensive frost damage and burns, consistent with attempting to keep a fire going. Broken branches high above indicated that someone had climbed the tree, possibly to look back toward the campsite or to escape something at ground level. Between the cedar tree and the tent, searches later found 3 more bodies. Their positions suggested they were attempting to return uphill. All 3 died from hypothermia. According to official autopsies, none had fatal external injuries. This sequence appears logical until the remaining 4 are examined. The first bodies were found near a large cedar tree at the forest edge. 2 were barefoot, wearing only underwear. Their hands showed signs of extensive frost damage and burns, consistent with attempting to keep a fire going. Broken branches high above indicated that someone had climbed a tree, possibly to look back toward the campsite or to escape something at ground level. Between the cedar tree and the tent, searches later found 3 more bodies. Their positions suggested they were attempting to return uphill. All 3 died from hypothermia. According to official autopsies, none had fatal external injuries. This sequence appears logical until the remaining 4 are examined. The last 4 bodies were found months later in a ravine, buried under several meters of compacted snow. Their injuries were dramatically different. 2 had massive chest trauma, including multiple rib fractures on both sides. 1 had a skull fracture, comparable in force to a high-speed vehicle collision. Another was missing her tongue, parts of her lips, and facial tissue. Several had internal hemorrhaging, without corresponding external wounds. The medical examiner stated that the chest injuries required a force comparable to a car crash, yet noted no damage to the skin, no bruising consistent with blunt impact, no defensive wounds. This combination is extremely rare and remains one of the most troubling elements of the case. Radiation testing conducted on clothing from 2 victims detected elevated levels. This was officially attributed to prior occupational exposure, as one victim worked in an environment involving radioactive materials. However, only certain garments tested positive, and no comprehensive environmental explanation was provided. The presence of radiation was acknowledged, then minimized, without further analysis. The timeline reconstructed by investigators is incomplete. The group stopped sending signals after a certain point, but the delay in initiating search operations was within normal expectations of the era. When search teams arrived, they documented the scene, but altered it in the process of recovery. The tent was handled, bodies were moved, some clothing was redistributed among survivors before full forensic documentation. These actions compromised later analysis. The official investigation lasted only a few months. It concluded that the hikers died due to exposure after fleeing their tent because of an unknown force they could not overcome. No criminal charges were filed. The case was classified. Access to materials was restricted for decades. Several alternative explanations emerged almost immediately. Avalanche was the first and most widely cited, yet the slope angle was below typical avalanche thresholds. There were no signs of large-scale snow displacement. The tent was not buried. The footprints remained visible for hundreds of meters. An avalanche powerful enough to cause the ravine injuries would have obliterated the campsite entirely. Another theory involved katabatic winds or infrasound causing panic. Public reaction was muted initially due to censorship. Families were discouraged from asking questions. When information later became public, the case took on a mythological quality that obscured serious forensic concerns. Sensational explanations drowned out documented inconsistencies. In the decades that followed, independent investigators re-examined photographs, reports, and testimony. Some original evidence was lost. Some contradictions could no longer be resolved. A reopened investigation many years later reaffirmed the avalanche explanation, but relied on computer simulations and assumptions rather than new physical evidence. Critics noted that key anomalies were again excluded. What remains undisputed is this: -1 competent individuals abandoned a functioning shelter in lethal conditions, not because of gradual danger, but because of an immediate and overwhelming threat. That threat did not leave clear physical traces. It did not behave like known natural disasters, and it did not affect all victims in the same way. The case endures not because of mystery alone, but because of investigative failure. Evidence was documented, then sidelined. Explanations were offered, then insulated from challenge. The phrase "unknown compelling force" was not a conclusion, it was a dismissal. The Dyatlov Pass Incident is not a puzzle waiting for a clever theory. It is a documented event where critical questions were never answered, and where the cost of certainty was paid with ambiguity. The truth may not be extraordinary, but it is incomplete, and until every contradiction is addressed with the same rigor as the official narrative, the case remains unresolved, not by mystery, but by omission.